tell anybody about my secret stash.
Good morning. Good morning, y'all. The meeting will come to order. It looks like we've got quorum. I'd like to welcome our Budget Committee and visitors to today's meeting. You have before you a very brief agenda for today's meeting, and our primary purpose, of course, here today is to adopt the committee's budget recommendation for fiscal year 2026. But before we do that, we need to handle a couple of items of regular committee business. The first one would be, of course, approval of the per diem and expenses for today's meeting. I've got a motion, second. All in favor? Aye. And opposed? Thank you. Approval of minutes from our November 14th meeting. Y'all got those, I believe, in your packet. You may not have had a chance to look at those. I'll give you just a moment. If they appear in order, I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Is there a second? Second. All in favor? And opposed? Thank you. All right, that brings us to the next item on the agenda and the main focus of our meeting today, and that's the adoption of the JLBC recommendation for fiscal year 2026. And we have kicked around these numbers, I know. Do I hear a motion to approve the Joint Legislative Budget Committee recommendation for fiscal year 2026? Mr. Chairman.
I move to approve. Do you want me to give the number?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I move to approve the FY 2026 budget recommendation of $7,024,736,419 in general fund, $674,538,081 in state support, $20,479,050,819 special fund. This brings to a total of $28,178,335,319
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's the gentleman's motion. Do I hear a second? Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? All right, all in favor? All opposed? Fiscal year 2026 budget recommendation is now approved. At this time, I would like to make some brief remarks regarding the 2026 budget recommendation for our visitors and the press at large. After my remarks, I would invite the Vice Chairman, Lieutenant Governor. He may have comments he would like to make as well. And of course, after the adjournment of today's meetings, the committee members will be around if anybody's got questions specifically for them on or any of the press on any of this from today. At this time, I believe, Mr. Chairman, they've got handouts. Do we have any handouts? You had asked me to prompt you about handouts, so that's what I... And y'all already have this in your packet, I believe, members of the committee. She's passing those out. By way of introduction, this morning, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee is presenting its fiscal year 2026 budget recommendation, which we believe will be a good starting point for the 2025 legislative session. The committee is recommending a conservative budget. This balanced budget includes a 2% set aside, $152 million. The committee has built the budget using only recurring funds, again, strengthening the state's reserves. As required by statute, the fiscal year 2026 revenue estimate of $7.627 billion was jointly adopted by the governor and the Joint Legislative Budget Committee in November. And the fiscal year 2026 revenue, you see it there on the slide, that estimate is an increase of 0.4% or $26.9 million above the fiscal year 2025 sine die estimate of $7.6 billion. The revenue estimate that was jointly adopted for that fiscal year 2026 is $7.627 billion. That leaves $7.474 billion available for appropriation after the 2% set aside. As you see those numbers there on the slide, the committee's recommendation for the general fund budget is $7.024 billion, which leaves $449 million available for appropriation during the session. And as of course, you also see there the committee's state budget support recommendation of $7.699 billion includes general funds, education enhancement funds, healthcare expenditure funds, and the tobacco control funds. It includes a decrease of $16.7 million in general funds. The committee's budget recommendation reflects funding increases that include these, as you see there. Health insurance increase at all state agencies for $21 million. A PERS increase at all state agencies, $15 million. Department of Education increased funding for the Chickasaw interest at $4.3 million. And that Department of Revenue fully funding homestead exemption, an additional $2 million. As you see reflected on the screen here, the state's top 10 most significant budgets account for 82.5% of total state support appropriations there. With the funding formula, obviously Medicaid, IHL general support, debt service, corrections, community college, mental health, general ed, IHL, and Department of Public Safety rounding those out. The committee's recommendation reflects $58.7 million in general fund reductions, applying JLBC guidelines, and another $5.8 million due to eliminating general funds for non-recurring spending. This also includes the removal of funding and deleting 1,722 vacant headcounts, spending down agency cash balances where possible, and eliminating funds for one-time expenditures. As far as reserves go, with the committee's fiscal year 2026 recommendation, a reserve of $2.749 billion exists. That includes $1.080 billion in capital expense funds and $449 million in general funds, as well as the other funds you see listed in this slide here. In concluding and in closing, I would say that the Joint Legislative Budget Committee has adopted a conservative budget for 2026 using funds available under current statute. A 2% set aside is maintained in this recommendation, and this budget is balanced using recurring revenue sources. And also, as noted, the committee has retained reserves of $2.7 billion and increased support for many vital state agencies, as has been discussed in this committee in our meetings. The committee's recommendation includes full funding, $667 million in the Working Cash Stabilization Reserve Fund, or rainy day, and it meets the cap of 10% of the previous year's appropriations. I would recognize the Vice Chairman and Lieutenant Governor at this time for comments.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was real pleased with the work of the committee this year. We have reduced our budget by over $16 million this year, when inflation, as you know, is increasing much more than that. So I'm proud of the efforts by the Legislative Budget Office and the members of the committee to not only hold ourselves against inflation, but also decrease the budget itself. Also, to continue to reduce the size of government by reducing the head counts by over 1,700, which are charged against us, as you know, in our expenses. And so it's very important that we run government like Mississippi runs its businesses, which is lean and mean. And I really appreciate the efforts by chairman and all the members of the committee to continue to reduce the size of government and reduce the budget, even in inflationary times. And I would ask that we ask the Legislative Budget Office to review the utilization of interest by various groups. We receive interest, and as y'all know, we have, if it wasn't for interest, we'd actually be in a negative at this particular point in time in the year, in our fiscal year. So the use of interest throughout various and sundry agencies, committees, whatever, has been spread around. And I believe the state's getting about 4.3% interest right now on its funds. And so there's a significant amount of money, somewhere in the $300 million plus, that has historically not been at that amount because interest rates were much smaller. So I'd ask the Legislative Budget Office to determine where those interests are and how much is accruing where it is, and whether or not that's something that the legislature wants to authorize the expenditure of or be put back in the general fund. But I'm real pleased with this committee and the Legislative Budget Committee and Speaker and all the hard work that was done by the Legislative Budget Office to bring us to this point. So that's mine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Does any committee member wish to be recognized at this time for question or comment? Certainly, it's an open mic. Gentleman from Rankin. All right. Come on. We encourage debate on our end of the bill, gentlemen. Do you have a picture in your packet? Is that in your packet? Y'all all have our photo from last session in the packet. It's probably worth what you paid for it. I don't know. All right. I want to thank the members of the committee for your hard work and diligence and for being here. I especially want to thank our elbow staff and folks scattered around the room for the real hard work that y'all did to pull all this together and keep us straight and from not knowing what we're talking about. I thank you for trying to educate those of us that try to, get there. It's a good budget recommendation for fiscal year 2026, and I'm proud of it. And if there's no other business to come before the committee, I'll entertain a motion. We stand adjourned. We got a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right. Meeting's adjourned.